Hi all, and welcome to this Tech Talk session. I am Joe Rafanelli. I'm one of the directors here at Innovatix. At Innovatix, we are a migration services organization. We migrate old technology to new. Every month, we try and figure out what's the best tech talk we can have for the most interest, and we feel we've come up with something very, very good today. We are going to be discussing leading successful platform migrations and best practices. I have my two key guys here. I have Haider on the phone and I have Nellaiappan. They've done project management for migration services collectively for over 30 years. They know they know the pitfalls, they know the challenges. I wanted them to share their experience with folks because doing migrations is not easy. We know there's a lot of tools out there, but there's still expertise that needs to take place. And we thought sharing would be good with folks and kind of going forward from there. This is going to be a roundtable discussion. It's a little bit different than our normal tech talks, if you will. It's going, like I said before, it's going to be based on experience, and we're going to cover the following topics, but I don't believe we're going to get to all of them. So we're going to talk about migration success goals and criteria. That's going to be one of the subtopics. We're going to talk about project planning. We're going to talk about implementation planning. We feel that we're only going to get to those three, and then we're going to do another tech talk and talk about the delivery model and development phase. We'll get into the deep dive of that, and then we're going to get into testing. Obviously, testing is very, very important, and we want to dedicate a lot of time for that as well. So without any further ado, we're going to start with Haider, and he's going to talk about some migration goals, like once a migration is started, and as a PM, what he does. And I'm going to have him, introduce himself, and we'll get right into it. Haider, thank you so much for joining.
Yep, thank you, Joe. So my name is Haider Hussain. I am program manager in Innovatix. I have been working in the migration domain for quite some time now, delivered a handful of projects. So as Joe suggested, we're going to be talking about the first actual step in the process of migrating a legacy system. So at this point, we need to understand where we are. At this point, the SOW has been signed, the engagement has been done, and we are at the very first step of the engagement with the customer. One of the key aspects to be covered at this point is basically to have a proper kickoff meeting with the agenda of clarifying the scope and objectives of the project, migration goals, and what is included and excluded in the scope. There are measurable and success criteria, and any functional priority and performance benchmarks which we need to set at this point. Secondly, we need to have a good understanding and confirmation of constraints and dependencies, such as the three pillars of timeline, budget, and quality, or any compliance requirement if there are any, resource availability, and so on and so forth. The stakeholder alignment is another very key aspect where we share expectations and to have them settled on the priorities and confirm a definition of success for everyone to kick off. So in all, the kickoff meeting is to establish a common understanding of the project scope, the objectives, governance, and the delivery plan to set the foundation of effective collaboration going forward. So with that in mind, I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I'm demonstrating a slide where we can see of a proper template of the kickoff meeting. Yep, I hope my screen is coming through for everybody.
Yeah, we do see it. Thank you.
So in the project kickoff meeting, this is the high-level agenda we have. We have an introduction of the stakeholders. The scope and success criteria is being looked into. Project timeline is being reviewed. Any governance schedule setup is to be reviewed. The architecture, any tools and technologies, prereq and their statuses, the user interface or design first look of the mockup screen, and any action items which are due and pendable at either of the ends. So I'm going to skim through these slides in little details. This is a high-level slide of the introductions of the stakeholders of both client side and the Innovatix delivery team. Then we move on to the success criteria and of what is in the scope and what is out of the scope of the project. Dive into the project timeline, as in this would be our incremental and iterative delivery methods, and followed up by the UAT and their responses and feedback to be updated. We look into the governance of the meetings being set up at this point. What would be their frequency, the schedule, the required attendees, and the actual medium through which we're going to have those meetings. A high level explanation of the system architecture being worked on and discussed and delivered. The tools and technologies to be used during the course of the development, the migration of the system, and the user interface first look, just to have a look and feel and make everybody comfortable of what the future system is going to be like. And finally, the list of prereqs of this is what we needed to start the proper migration process, what has been completed so far, what is pending, and so on and so forth. And last item I have in my list is the action items of what is currently outstanding and what needs to be actioned to get the whole process in the running at this point. So yeah, that's pretty much it regarding the high level of
Yeah.
project kickoff we cover. So
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that definitely sets the tone. I think I'm just for folks that sometimes want to do this on their own, and we get why you do. But as you can see, there's a lot of steps that go in to doing a successful migration. I just want to focus in on the architecture. I know, we have our own architecture that we use. We're a Microsoft shop, but there is some flexibility there. But there's a lot of discussions in terms of what architecture is being used today by the client and how is it going to change. And hey, if you don't mind, pull back the architecture slide, and I want Nelly to comment on maybe some of the challenges or anything you want to bring up, some of your experiences about how the architectures are different and what is our pivot, things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Hello, everyone. So, basically, for the architecture point of view, as the client is coming from the legacy migration, so it can be varies from the Visual Fox Pro or a VB6 or a classic ASP. So basically, from the Visual Fox Pro or the VB6, they are coming from the desktop application. So they always looks for the future application will be a browser-based application, or they still want to go with their desktop application in future, because based on the security point of view, they may come back and ask like, okay, how how secure my application if I migrate in the web-based application. So we are giving a provision like, okay, we are a Microsoft shop, and we'll develop the application in the latest standards and follow all the security protocol, and we have ensure that the application is ready in the new migrated application, either in the web, which can be hosted on-prem or the cloud hosted as well. And we'll ensure that the security of the application is maintained, and we follow all the security standards and protocol for our implementation. So based on the client requirement, we'll convince them like either we'll go for either the Angular based full stack or a React based full stack. Or recently some of the clients coming up and ask like, okay, can you guys do in the Blazor as well? And we are doing that as well. So we are doing that. Some clients, they still stick onto the desktop application. They want to keep the application within themselves. So for them, we choose WPF as the .NET application, and then consume for the API side for that. So those are the main thing we are working for them.
And I know we do. I know there's a series of conversations that we have before everything is buttoned down. We we'll come to the table, so to speak, with our plan in terms of how the architecture, how we perceive it should be, and then to Nelly's point, we'll make those tweaks in order to suffice, what the clients might need. But clearly, we will make those suggestions and help the project move forward. Now, this is just not a discussion about what we do with it. We just want to give you an idea of the detail that goes in to doing a successful migration. So I know we're talking a lot about how Innovatix does this, but it's one of these things where we're saying we're just trying to share information and the level of detail you got to go into to get that first step correct, right? You're setting the tone up with the kickoff meeting and understanding requirements and things of that nature, like Haider had mentioned, right? But then there's a series of other things that go on, in terms of getting getting both sides comfortable about exactly what we're migrating, and like Haider said, in and out of scope, and then there's a whole lot of project planning that comes with that. Now, talking about project planning, I wanted excuse me, I wanted Haider to give a little bit on the current state and what he kind of goes through to get the project plan, in a fashion where it could be followed and people are being responsible or accountable for what they have to deliver. Like at most points it's on the IX side or the migration services company, but there's certainly some responsibilities on the client side as well. Haider, can you comment on that for me, please?
Yeah, sure. So once we are through, this is on this step, we are through the kickoff. This step, I usually call it the current state assessment and our target platform readiness state. So one of the key elements in this, and the most core element, is basically the assessment of the legacy system, to actually review the legacy system in quite detail and assess the parameters like the system architecture, the code quality, any dependencies, any technical debt, to understand and baseline complexity or the planning effort associated with implementing that complexity. Or secondly, the target state readiness, as in to estimate and assess the readiness of the target platform, to make sure, which also include the infrastructure, any security protocols. As Nellaiappan suggested, that there are some customers who wants to stay on the desktop application for additional security it entails. So to make sure the security protocols is basically in place, any development tools are being used, any requirements for scalability to support the migration. Further on, to identify any gaps or risk in terms of the both implementations. We need to document those gaps and risk and have to have a understanding regarding them, complexity between the current state and the target environment, so that would be inclusive in the scope definition and effort estimation for the whole migration effort. This assessment phase is usually centered around helping us to plan realistically by understanding what is where we are today, what is the current system, and what we need to be regarding the readiness of the target system, and what risk we anticipate coming our way, and how can we manage those risks by early identification and planning our way forward.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Lots of planning goes into this, and I believe we typically take, even as an experienced migration services company, we still take about 30 days to give, just correct me, to give an actual project plan. And and again, this is just to share, even with a template, right, that we have, there's project plan template, and then we fill in the tasks based on this particular customer. It still takes a while to get through. And I know you've even had points where the project is so long, we'd have to even break up the project plan within certain segments or within certain periods of time. Maybe Nelly, you can comment on that. I know you've had a couple of clients like that where the project is so long, you had to break it up a little bit.
Right. So basically, in the project planning stage, as I already mentioned about this, the clients coming from the desktop and the web. So we'll be defining for when the users are new to the web application, they need to know about what is the differences they are going to face in the new system, and how comfortable they are moving from the desktop application to web. As well as we explain them about the single sign-on or the authentication mechanism, like they may use a dedicated AD-based authentication, the legacy. And with the web-based applications, we'll talk about the single sign-on of that, and then talk about all the infrastructure point of view for the web application, how this looks like on that point of view. And when we put onto the project plan and the details of that, the next stage we'll be talking about on the sequencing of the modules. So when we prepare the project plan, we may take, like as Joe mentioned, it takes like 30 days. So reason of the 30 days is like, we'll discuss with the client, okay, you have a bigger application which can varies from 6 months to 8 months to 12 months. And the client will ask about, okay, some clients wants like, I want to go live with the parallel application when they start the application, the migration. So we'll define with them as a plan, like, okay, what is your target? So whether you want to go live after the complete migration, or you want to go live in parallel with the new system migration. So the client will decide on how their business criticality is, and they will design it out. and then they will define like what is the sequence of the modules. So we'll talk in detail on the sequencing as a next topic, how we are sequencing that, and then how we are putting up why that takes time for defining the project plan, like 30 days or 45 days.
Yeah, that makes sense. And most of our projects, and Nelly, you said it, I just want to repeat it, between 3 and 6, 9 months, we try and, we're using all our tools, right, and all tools available through AI to migrate, as faster with the quality, obviously, right? But even in today's age, there's still no easy button, right? There still needs the proper level of attention, right? The expertise is what I want to get to as well. And we didn't mention this yet, but there's a decent amount of, depending how big the migration is, depending on the lines of code, right? There could be 3, 4, 5, 6 developers and QAs involved, right? Just depends on the size. I know folks are always very worried about timing, right? So the best we try and do is keep it within that year, but if it's, something that's, 500,000 lines of code, it may have to spill over to year 2, right? And it's important because you don't want to rush something like this. This is an application that's typically out there for 20, 25 years. So if it only takes a year to migrate, it's still a pretty good, ratio, is what I want to say. But it's a matter of, if it goes over a certain amount of time, we typically say, okay, is there an MVP, minimal viable product, that we can put out there so folks can actually use it? And half the time that is the case, where if you finish a certain amount of time or a certain amount of the screens, it's usable, and it's something where, folks can put it out there on their platform, and then we can get to the rest of it later. We've seen that on some occasions. Nelly, put you on the spot one more time. Any questions? Anything you want to add about the MVP? MVPs 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. So basically, as I already mentioned, so some clients, if the project is longer, so they don't want to wait until the whole migration gets completed. So we basically put up like a MVP based application, and then we'll say like, okay, you can go live with the new parallel system in another 6 months. So we'll define like every 6 months we'll define an MVP. And then once you complete that milestone of that MVP, the client can go live with the new system. And we have our own tool called the sync tool, which will be syncing between both the applications. So when the legacy application, when they come from FoxPro, they basically use the FoxPro application as the FoxPro database. So when they come to the new system, we'll use the SQL. So in order to run both application in parallel, so we have other tools which will be syncing between both databases, so that the new system and the new modules can go live, and still the client can use the other modules of the old system. But on parallel, on real time, our tools will sync between both databases, so that the system will run in parallel, the business continuity will be on plan, and we'll define it. So we are successful on executing this kind of projects in a couple of clients, and it's like a more than 2 years project, and the client is already in live with the system of both the application in parallel. So that is one thing.
I think that's a great option. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's a great option to take smaller bites, if you will, but still be able to use it. We have a lot of clients that love that option. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so I want to continue. I'm going to call this the third and final topic. I want to talk about implementation planning, and I want to hand it over to Haider. Maybe you can say a few words about the planning part of it, about the implementation planning part of it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. So at this stage, we are through with the assessment of the application and identification of our target platform. We know exactly, we have a very good idea, and we know exactly what the legacy system is like and where we want to be with our target system. So the next step is, first up, to select on a migration approach. We have multiple options as per the experience. We can go via a big bang approach to cover everything at once and give a proper rollout of the application. That depends on the complexity and size of the application as well, mostly. Second option is, as Nellai was just talking about, the phased deployments, the phased delivery. That's mostly incremental and iterative delivery. That way, customer gets a chance to start using their new product while we are working on the further modules. This is also helpful in the case where customer wants to market their product before the final launch, just to get their customers on board as well. And secondly, a parallel-based approach, which will be mostly defined on the technical complexity and risk or any other dependencies. So once we have the migration approach jotted down, we actually look forward for the implementation sequencing. This was also being touched base briefly a bit by Nele. So we need to have a very good sequence defined of the modules or services or integrations to be done and in which order, just so it gets through to the customer at the right order where they can start using them and the product starts delivering the value it is supposed to, instead of just delivering them in a full capacity. This also helps us in basically minimizing any disruptions. And then the incremental validation in terms of the customer feedback is also very helpful for clearing out any of the other development of the other modules and clarifying any confusions or anything like that. The scope control is also one of the key elements in this phase, as in we need to enforce a very strict control policy throughout the implementation. There is some margin for negotiation if it's a request from the customer, as in if they need quite urgently, we can incorporate that, but we can negotiate that something which is not that important at that particular stage could be pushed down the line so that we can incorporate the most critical element at one particular point and without impacting any stability or timelines or quality during the implementation. So the focus, this is the very crucial phase of the implementation, and the focus is to basically execute a very controlled and in a very predictable manner while minimizing risk and avoiding any scope drift.
Yeah. We mentioned sequencing a decent amount of time. I know we're going to dive into our next call. Very critical. And we've had times where we've agreed on the sequencing, and then unfortunately sometimes clients change it around, and it kind of really adds to the timeline. Or as much as we tried not to have it add to the timeline, it will, because there's a science to it. And again, we'll get into that next time, how that science works out, where any changes could be detrimental in terms of the duration, and nobody wants to add duration to any project.
Yeah.
Okay, I had two other topics which we're going to go over next time. We're going to talk about the development phase, and we're going to talk about the testing, which is going to take a decent amount of time for our next talk. I want to thank Haider and Nellaiappan for their time and their expertise. Again, these guys, I've pulled these guys away from their migration service projects to do this. I think they said a lot of good things in this call. They kind of dive deep, and I do appreciate that. If there are any questions that you want to run through me, and I can ask these guys about doing migrations, that would be fine. I think we're going to put my contact information up in a second. There I am. All right, folks. I want to thank everybody for their time, for their attention, and until next time, have a great day. Take care, all.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.